One. Hi. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tia Wright, a Master of Environmental Management candidate at the Yale School of Environment, and I'll be moderating this panel focusing on food insecurity, climate events, and vulnerable communities. We have four wonderful young scholars today that will be taking time to share the hard work they are actively doing in their fields. In order of presenters, we have Destiny, Storm, and Jason from the Yale School of Environment as Master of Environmental Science candidates, followed by Catalina, a youth activist with the Latinas for Climate. We will have a Q&A following everyone's presentation and a small discussion, so please hold all questions till the end. Without further ado, we will turn it to Destiny.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Destiny Traylor, and as Tia mentioned, I'm Master's of Environmental Science candidate at the Yale School of Environment. My research explores the multiple nuanced barriers posed to Latin women when accessing emergency food safety nets in their communities in the United States. Now, a little bit for context of why I selected this research, as the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic set, subsequently, poverty rates, unemployment, and food insecurity rise. And when you explore the complex challenge of the food insecurity crisis, you'll see that there are political, social, and economic determinants of who and who doesn't have access to food. Specifically in the United States, the national food insecurity rate is 10.6%, while Latin households it's 34%. Hence, for my thesis, I wanted to focus on this, but look at it through emergency food outlets, considering to meet the growing food insecurity concerns, churches, schools, nonprofits, and have developed emergency food safety nets. And emergency food safety nets are critical lifelines for people to not only feed themselves, but to feed their families. And seeing these incidents of discrimination and barriers constitute injustice that I wanted to pay attention for my thesis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Storm Lewis, and I will be talking about my thesis research as a Master of Environmental Science student. So I focus on food sovereignty and food justice, and for a little bit of background, I chose this topic based on the years and centuries of discrimination that Black farmers have faced in the U.S. And in 2017, less than 1% of farmers in New York State were Black, and many of those farmers made a fraction of the income that their white counterparts made during those years and throughout time, and still to this very day. And so with that in mind, I really wanted to understand what are the ways that communities can achieve sovereignty and achieve autonomy over their food supply chain. So thinking about not just how we access food and consume it, but also what are the educational systems that are available for farmers, what are the financial systems that allow for farmers to access the resources needed, and along with the thinking about the different climate mitigation technologies and practices that are now available, and making sure to put Black farmers specifically at the forefront of the climate movement, and making sure that they have what they need to be resilient in their farming practices. And so with that, my study questions: what Black-led, Black-owned, Black-founded food production organizations, farms, gardens exist in Brooklyn, New York specifically? And I study Brooklyn because I'm from there, and that's my hometown. And there are particularly high rates of food insecurity compared to the other boroughs. And do these organizations self-identify as sovereign? So do they identify with the different terminologies? Do they feel that they have autonomy, even if they are demonstrating it in certain ways? And then also, what are the ways that local governments can better support these individuals to gain access to whatever they need, whether that's financial resources, educational resources, or so on. And my research will really focus on two different methodologies of participant observation, or it has during the summer, last summer. I focused on participant observation and volunteer work. And so these are some of the many gardens that I volunteered at. So I spoke with over 46 Black-led and Black-founded organizations and did a range of different work. So I sold produce at farmers markets. I picked up trash. That was a huge issue in New York. And I also did many other things like weeding, hoeing the land, and also just tending to whatever the different organizations needed at the time. So I'll pass it over to Jason now.
Thank you, Storm. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a Master's of Environmental Science candidate at Yale School of the Environment. In my program, I study community-based resource distribution in preparation to, during, and post-disaster, specifically in Puerto Rico. This is important work because the compounding challenges of the historic disinvestment and extraction of the Puerto Rican people, the economy, and the compounding climate crisis as a result of Hurricane Maria in 2017, which struck the archipelago as a high-end Category 4 storm, our energy grid has been in complete despair since then. In 2019, there were massive earthquakes in the southwest corner of the main island. And just in 2022, Hurricane Fiona struck Puerto Rico as a Category 1 storm, but still caused massive power outages, damaged infrastructure, and a lot of flooding. Through these disasters, government response has been lackluster at best from both the federal government and the Puerto Rican government. And so the response to these disasters fell on the shoulders of community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and mutual aid networks. More than 130,000 Puerto Ricans were displaced and resettled into parts of the United States, such as New York, Florida, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And that 130,000 number is only the Puerto Ricans that decided to stay. It doesn't capture those who migrated to and from Puerto Rico and the stateside United States. And it also doesn't even include those that were displaced based from the earthquakes or the other hurricanes. The level of displacement, along with my lived experience as a Puerto Rican living in the diaspora, and for those who aren't familiar, diaspora just means when you're living in a different country from sort of where you're from or where your family's from. Made the foundation of my work really rooted in how do we connect organizations in the Puerto Rican diaspora in the United States, and more specifically Connecticut, with Puerto Rico. And I chose Connecticut because our university is housed in Connecticut, and also Connecticut has the highest population percentage of Puerto Ricans total, with about 10% of Puerto Ricans taking the entire state's population. So understanding how community-based organizations in the Puerto Rican diaspora are mobilizing to support organizations in Puerto Rico in their preparation and response to disaster is the foundation of my work. And I've been doing so by asking about the challenges that organizations face from funding, from energy policy, from transportation policy, and for under-resourced staffing.
Thank you. My name is Catalina. I'm an 18 years old climate activist from Chile. And I'm a law student and the co-founder of Latinas for Climate, which is an international network of young Latinas which we aim to connect climate crisis with gender issues. We aim to talk about the ecofeminist perspective of the climate crisis and to really show how it's affecting the human rights in our region. We try also to improve representation of Latinas in decision-making spaces, and related to food security, we really give a voice, a platform, so women, girls, young girls like me who are already facing the climate crisis consequences and which is affecting our food security, to show in these kind of spaces the reality of our lives. I also follow with the Coronivia negotiations, the Coronivia Joint Work on Agriculture, and there we realized that the negotiators don't really showing the needs of their people. And with Latinas for Climate, now we're over 100 volunteers from 15 countries. This year we're a delegation of 14 girls from 7 countries. And we've been working on that to give a platform to ratify the Escazú Agreement, to improve the environmental democracy, to show that Latinas, we have a voice, we can do something, and we have to work for our future. This year at COP, I've tried to show how in my community, I'm from the south of Chile, my dad had told me this year that due to heavy rains, all the harvest was ruined, like only these days, this week. So all my neighbors, all the community that I grew up, it's destroyed now. They don't have anything to take from the land, what they need and what they need to survive all the summer. So we try mostly to show this reality, to get to the heart of people and to really make them get into action, because without the human right perspective, without showing that the climate crisis consequences are already here in our lives in the global south, probably they will never do something, because here in COP it's only words and no actions, and we really need the actions in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Asia, in Africa, and all the global south. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, we will have just 3 questions to start off a small discussion amongst our panelists. Our first question is, what has been your methods for active community engagement and data collection?
I employed a mixed method approach to collect my data. First, I conducted 100 semi-structured and informal interviews among Latin women, community leaders, elected officials, and other food access organizers I found in the 2 communities I studied, Holyoke, Massachusetts, and Hialeah, Florida. Second, I collected 1,189 surveys among Latin women who were seeking emergency food. Third, I completed a geospatial analysis, integrated shape files with census tracts to demonstrate the emergency food outlets in relation to walkability measures, transit routes, racial and ethnic disparities, and the low-income tracts. In terms of community engagement, I followed a bi-directional framework as I was collecting my data, where I was really intentional about engaging in the community that I was studying and offering my labor, skills, and my time to help out with the food insecurity crisis. As displayed earlier in the photos I had in the collage, I volunteered at food distributions, I offered Spanish translation services for resume workshops, I engaged in childcare. I really tried to be intentional that the people I was studying were also very busy with their lives, and I tried my best to be in these communities while also helping where the need is made, because these are both 2 very special communities in the United States, and I wanted to, as a researcher, be bidirectional, not extractive.
So for my work, I touched on this a little bit earlier. I worked on participant observation as well as volunteer work, but I really, during the interview process, made sure to ask questions about what are the challenges and what are the needs, and taking into account what each individual person said, and in some ways shifting what the focus of the outcomes of my research would be as I went throughout the process, so that my work was being responsive to community needs, not just after the fact in the processing when I went back to New Haven, but really throughout the summer. And so when I was doing the volunteer work, I was really able to focus in on certain communities. So what I realized was that even though the spatial analysis that I'll complete with geographic information system software will show the breadth of different organizations across Brooklyn, New York, I realized that I didn't have the capacity to make a meaningful impact through volunteer work and through service at every single organization. So I really focused in on a select few to do more extensive work with them. So the Hattie Carthen Farmers Market and Garden was one of them that I did a lot of work with. And so by the end of the summer, I was one of the lead farm share managers and helped to distribute food and helped them with those services, along with other work to tend to their garden in their urban garden as well. And so I think that was an incredibly valuable experience to understand what the challenges are, but really get in depth rather than spreading myself too thin, essentially. And then I think it was also really important to use geographic information system to overlay the presence of these different gardens and different urban agriculture activity happening with racial demographic information to understand where certain areas there's more prevalence of urban agriculture activity happening and where there are disparities. And so I found that there was a high correlation between black communities in the upper part of Brooklyn, along with the Green Thumb Gardens, which are the government sponsored and resourced gardens of New York City. And that was really valuable, particularly because it just showed a correlation that gardening is a response to the high levels of food insecurity. And so one of the people that I spoke with actually said that in Brooklyn it's grow or die. So that was a really interesting finding that I'm looking into more now.
Thank you, Storm. This summer I had the opportunity to spend 1 month in Puerto Rico, and while I was there, I was engaging in semi-structured interviews and volunteering opportunities and surveys with community-based organization leaders across the northeastern part of the main island. And I think that's an important disclaimer because I haven't, when you're there for a month and you don't really have the grant funding to be able to pay for a full rental car for the entire summer, you can only get but so far. So most of my in-person interactions were in the San Juan metro area. They were in the eastern side of the main island. So I used, the Zooms and the Qualtrics surveys to be able to reach the other organizations that were out on the west, in the center of the main island, and in the south. And I was really intentional about making sure that we also got Vieques and Culebra in there. Those are the two islands that often get forgotten about when Puerto Rico's talked about in these conversations. I had the opportunity to reconnect with an organization that I used to volunteer for and to fundraise for called Waves Ahead, and they focus on older LGBTQ plus food insecurity. And so by connecting with them, I was able to go package some food boxes. I was able to plant some seeds in their gardens. And I was also able to use their connections to be able to engage in snowball sampling, to be able to just keep going down the line of everybody that they knew in all of their organizations as well. The surveys were really, really critical for my research. I broke up my surveys into different categories, where the first category was asking about the organizations and some of their organization mission and their board size and their staff size and how much they pay average for salary, just to get an idea of the health of the organization and the nonprofit landscape. Then I transitioned into the questions about what are the resources that they distributed through emergency resources, or through the emergency situations like the disasters. So it asked about, do you distribute, batteries and lanterns? Do you distribute generators? Do you distribute food, clothing, medical aid, and other services as well. And then I also asked about some of those compounding challenges that I spoke about before. So what does organization funding look like, and how does that make it hard for you to be able to distribute resources? I asked about the energy policy, the debt crisis. I asked about transportation policy, just to see where all of these organizations lied in incorporating the political landscape in Puerto Rico in the work that they're also doing. And so it was just really important for me to remain grounded and reflective in my time there, not only as a graduate student researcher, but also as a Puerto Rican from the diaspora, just to make sure that I was still checking myself in all of those places.
As Latinas for Climate, we know that we can't work alone. We know that we have to work in community. We have to work together with other NGOs that have been more years than us working in the front lines. So we've been connecting, we've been doing network with all of them to learn about their work, to have their database, and to really ask them their knowledge, to really show us the way to do something. And we mostly work with the Escazú Agreement, that is the regional agreement from ECLAC, from UN, that aims to improve environmental democracy through access to justice, access to information, and to public participation, and to also to defend the defenders, because Latin America, as you may know, it's one of the most dangerous regions in the world to be a climate activist. So with that, we work together with different NGOs from the region to work in the front lines to do something together. And now we have a project that we're working on, and we've been trying to develop here at COP to create more information, because we need more information about women in Latin America. We need to separate women and men in the collection on data. And for that, we want to ask thousands of women, young girls and girls around every of our countries on how climate change is impacting them. Because yeah, we know that 80% of the climate displaced people is women. We know that we have 3 more times chances to die in a climate disaster. And we know that only 3.8% that of all the people that attended COP26 were Latinas. But we don't really know how climate change is impacting us. We have the testimonies, we have the voice, we have our experiences, our stories, but we have to know the information so the fund can get to us, so we can show really that the climate change is something that is happening today and even yesterday, not in 2030, not in 2050, that it's something from the present. And yeah, we work mostly with the communities, with the front lines, with the women that are already receiving the impacts of climate change and that don't have the capacity to do something about it.
Thank you for that. I'm wondering, what impacts are you hoping for your work to have?
A few things. To start off, I hope to get published as I'm writing my report. And I hope this report will serve as usable knowledge for nuanced emergency food recovery and planning efforts that pay special consideration to Latin women, promote a more inclusive approach to distributing food, and ultimately aids in reducing food insecurity rates. Now, as I collected my data, I tried to also be inclusive in terms of accessibility. For example, I collected my surveys in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole. Thus, as I decimate my findings for my thesis, I also aim to follow the same approach. We're publishing in hopefully 2 languages, as along with seeing how I could take this data and transfer it back to the community in a more accessible format that's not in the academic journal. Also, Holyoke, Massachusetts and Hialeah are essentially not there in the scholarship. In fact, there's only 1 scholarly article that even mentions Holyoke, Massachusetts. Thus, these are 2 places in the United States that are experiencing severe food injustices that I hope will fill the gaps as I bring my research into the academic scholarship.
So for me, there are 3 major areas where I hope to have impact with my research. The first of which being a visual maps and spatial analysis representing the placement of these different food sovereignty activity happening across Brooklyn, New York. So really highlighting where there are financial institutions that are supporting the distribution of loans, grants, and resources, along with the educational components, so places like Farm School, NYC, that facilitate and foster agricultural education amongst young farmers, up-and-coming farmers, and then also really mapping out as well just the farmers in themselves, the gardeners, and the distribution systems as well that exist that are Black-owned, Black-led, and Black-founded. And so for me, it was really important because growing up in Brooklyn, New York, this is a resource that I wish I had. I wish I knew where Black farmers existed. I wish I knew where I could go to support them. And I think having a visual representation of this that doesn't require words or an extensive kind of description would be one way to help people navigate how to best support these different organizations. Another area that or another outcome of my work would be a resource guide essentially for these different individuals producing food to access different funding resources. So one of the biggest things that came up during my interviews was that there are levels of gatekeeping information about different funds that are available to gardeners and to farmers. There's also issues around just lack of having a difficult ability to navigate the online resources available. And so people are coming into the gardening and agricultural space with different experiences and different levels of familiarity with grant writing processes. And it would be really important to have a consolidated list that's accessible of different financial resources that people can access. And third, I would have a policy recommendation. So New York City has recently developed the urban agriculture department and having more intentional programming around that. So I think being in conversation with those representatives about what I'm finding in my research would be incredibly important, and really making sure that they are including the perspectives of these communities so that the policies that they produce moving forward are really responding to the essential needs.
One of the, I guess, greatest parts about the program that I'm in here at Yale is that I get to leverage a lot of resources from Yale and connect them to direct community-based organizations. So what I've been doing this past semester has been working with this organization called Junta for Progressive Action. They're a nonprofit based in New Haven, Connecticut, and they were leading a lot of the efforts of the Puerto Rican resettlement efforts after Hurricane Maria, after the earthquakes, and after Hurricane Fiona. We also received a couple families in there. And one of the ways that I connected, Yale's resources with this nonprofit, worked through the Yale Environmental Protection Clinic, where I worked with the executive director of the nonprofit to be able to put together a project description to bring students in on a project on that disaster resettlement all semester. So we were highlighting an op-ed and public-facing pieces about how we can connect social services to climate mitigation and adaptation funding strategies. Because right now, from the interviews that I've been doing across the Connecticut diaspora nonprofit landscape, have been that the grant funding available for climate adaptation and mitigation don't always include disaster resettlement, and if they do, they don't talk about it for social service-based organizations. It's more so about the actual funding of programming. Another piece that I'm working on with my thesis that I'm really passionate about is creating the contact guide for organizations in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora to share their information. So it'll be a summary of some of my, all of the survey data that shows the organization, their mission, how you can get in contact with them, what they have, what they don't have, and what they need, so that when it is distributed and when it is time to engage in that disaster preparation, that disaster response, and that disaster recovery work, that the organizations have the people that they need to connect to, all in that guide.
Latinas for Climate has already been working for more than 2 years now. We created this network in August 2020, so it's been a long process and we want to keep growing. But our biggest hope, I think, is to really create a big platform so other Latinas can use it and to really show them that we have to break the barriers that are imposed to us to really have access to these kind of spaces like COPs, like another UN events, like the decision-making spaces, even in our own countries, and to really show them that we have to use our voice, we have to use the tools that we have, the power that we have, to change our realities, to do something, and to show them that even though we are one of the victims of the climate crisis, we're already here, and we're also here to save us and everyone for the same issue. So we really hope that the girls that are now following us, even the elders that are already creating knowledge in our region, can do something for the climate crisis and can really be being heard in these kind of spaces. So that's our biggest hope, I think, and to create a change in the front lines where it's more needed in our countries.
Thank you. How has your work shaped and inspired your personal future endeavors?
In so many ways. As I'm writing up this thesis report, I'm also having so many new findings that I never expected. For example, food insecurity has many layers to unpeel, and I didn't anticipate seeing the way the climate crisis impacted people's relationship with emergency food access. Thus, as I'm applying to PhD programs, I'm hoping to engage in a dissertation that explores this relationship between the climate crisis and food production. Also, this was my first time engaging in these qualitative methods that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed being in the community and seeing how I could use my access and skills in academia to ultimately help in some of these issues that are occurring there. Yes, so it ultimately inspired me to pursue a career in academia and see how I could see some of these disparities and what solutions could happen in a multifaceted format.
So I think my research has been incredibly valuable in inspiring me to pursue my passion. So what I learned from speaking with different farmers was just the value of having autonomy over the means of production across the food supply chain, and really, I think that is shifted. I think while I'm interested specifically in pursuing a PhD later on in my career, I think it also made me think about different entrepreneurial activities and looking back to some of my interests that I pursued, particularly in mycelium production. And so now I'm thinking about how can I take the lessons that I learned about starting a business in food production, agricultural production, and producing knowledge, and create a viable business model that will be an intersection between a hybrid nonprofit and for-profit, and mainly just to fund itself. And so basically, I, after speaking with a lot of different farmers, a lot of the interests were around mushroom production, and so figuring out a way to increase education around mycelium. And so as a point of reference, mycelium is the root system essentially for mushrooms, and it's honestly a wonder material. It can provide a source of nutrients. It can be a means of building infrastructure. It can also store carbon and increase soil health. And so thinking about the different values of that and ways that farmers can apply those different benefits to their work is something that I'm now looking into and understanding. How can I increase access to knowledge about mycelium? What are ways to create different communities for those that are interested in learning about that particular area is something that I'm exploring now. And then another component of my research that really impacted my personal development is really just connecting me back to my community in Brooklyn and feeling like a more active community member, because before I had very little knowledge about the urban agriculture activity happening in the area. And so being able to now be a part of these different efforts that are going on and ongoing, and still speaking with Farmer Jan from the Hattie Carthen Farmers Market has been truly valuable for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces that my work has done for me has challenged my own mental space in aligning my values of change with the work that needs to be done and the work that's available. I think specifically in the disaster resettlement funding space, it's a question of whether or not we can properly fund nonprofit organizations in a diaspora community for disaster resettlement if they're not even getting the proper funding in the first place to run their existing programming to support their current community. So it's like this idea of long violence and slow violence that is really challenging to grapple with. And it's, if we really want to think big, we can infuse, climate reparations and that talk into the work for U.S. territories. But how do we sort of take the steps from where we are now to get to that point through disaster resettlement, through, and nation building and community building in these homelands as well. Going back to that piece on, Puerto Rico, it's interesting to think about the future of Puerto Rico and thinking about the status and how funding could possibly be impacted to community-based organizations in Puerto Rico based on the future status of Puerto Rico. And so figuring out how do we just allocate funding properly in supporting community-based organizations, supporting mutual aid networks, and really getting into that process of nation building, honestly.
This is a really hard question, I think. For me, like I consider myself an activist, and now that I've been doing this for over 3 years, like I don't see my life without activism. I am 19. This is my second COP. This is my like sixth or fifth like UN event in person. So everything I do now in law school in Chile, like in my life, in my hometown, everything it's around climate activism and how we really can create an impact in my community specifically. So I think that now I'm able to see everything through a different lens, through a different perspective, to really see how the gender issue it's present in every space, how the climate crisis is not being talked enough, how the public politics are not enough for what we need. And that has led me to work now in more than 5 roundtables at the Congress to create laws so we can improve the legislation in Chile and to create more justice in environmental laws. So yeah, it's something that now it's in every aspect of my life, and I think that now my friends and my family, it's like over it because I've been talking about this constantly for more than 3 years, but they are getting used to it sometimes. So yeah, I think that that way.
Thank you for these amazing responses. It's so great to see all the important work that's being done for our communities. With that, we'll move on to our Q&A. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll have them answered.
Okay, hi, my name is Fatma. I'm also a climate activist from Pakistan, and I obviously have an understanding in the role that academia can play in supporting like climate activism in both the global north and south. And like you said, you're also 19, I'm also 19. So what advice would you give to other climate activists who are trying to make like academic spheres their strong point for like climate activism and climate projects? Because even in like all my spheres, I focused on kind of supporting climate activism through institutes. So like, how would you guys suggest something around that?
I can go first. I would suggest that in the space of academia, it could be difficult to advocate, but I think depending on the methods, theoretical approaches that you employ, I think you have the opportunity to use your research to help advocate for the demands in climate activist spaces. You have the data to support it.
Yeah, I think something that I've thought a lot about in my undergrad was participatory action research, and I still think about that now, and as a form of this iterative back and forth process of developing a question with a community, understanding how to address it, moving forward, and then going back to the drawing table with that community. And I think what I found is that it's a really long and extensive process to do well. And I think as a student, it's been really, in my master's program now, doing a second research project to understand what are the limitations of what can be achieved in an academic project that takes course over a set amount of time. So for instance, we're in a program where it's 2 years and we're only able to work on the research and collect the data within that kind of year and a half going into the summer. And so when you think about really like grounded research that is truly participatory and truly beneficial to communities, a lot of times it takes several years to build trust and to build relationships and to do that work. So sometimes there are limitations to what can be achieved, and recognizing that is important. And so I think that's also why I personally went back to my community, because there is that base level of work and relationship building that I've done in my past research. So I was able to bring those relationships in. So with the Corbin Hill Food Project and the Black Farmer Fund and Farm School NYC, and having worked with them, I was able to gradually build up that trust from prior years that now informs my work that's taking place within this 1.5 year time span. So I would recommend choosing topics where you already have a strong foundation and a strong community relationship, so that you don't have to start from scratch, because it can be really tricky if you try to go into a new community and develop an extensive project and create false promises that can't necessarily be met within a short time frame.
Yeah, I similarly with Storm, went back to my hometown for my undergrad thesis project. And one of the things that I appreciate most about being in these academic spaces is all the other doors that it provides me access to, and also being able to sort of have the language then to explain problems that even like I was experiencing growing up or in my hometown, that my family still experiences, that a lot of people knew how to sort of mitigate and how to adapt to, but didn't really understand where things were coming from. So I think it's like, for me, it's been like a personal self journey of figuring out, again, how do I fit myself in this space? How can I be able to apply what I'm learning, or apply what I can learn about my communities, and just try to move that needle forward. But I think it can definitely be tough. You know, I think I question that myself sometimes, as well as like, is publishing my research behind a paywall really going to get, reach the communities that I want it to reach? And I think it's just what Storm was saying, figuring out like who your audience is, like what are the actual limitations, like moving the academic scholarship is important so that other people can also be thinking about it. And also, how can you then be able to create that resource guide or that website or that, that action plan with the community, so that they can also use your data and that information as well. And also just thinking about like ownership and authorship of like, how are you sort of including these people in your pieces as well, and not just having, your name on it, but also just giving thanks and giving respects and acknowledgments to everybody that you worked with throughout the entire time or duration of your project.
I will say to not give up. Like being a woman from the global south, a young women, we have to face so many barriers in the academia. And for that same reason, we have to know what we value, what we know, and what we like trust in ourselves and not give up, and to achieve our goals. I will say that's like my biggest advice for everything that we do, like being women from the global south, probably not having that much economic resources to to use in what we want. We have to figure something out always to go through everything that the society put us in the middle of the way. So just giving the strength and the force, and to have your community to support you, to find help in others that are going to the same, that's really, really important to survive.
Any other questions?
Hi everyone. Dr. Dominic Bendar here. I'm curious if you all can share a bit more about how do you find joy in your work, and also how do you restore energy within yourselves after engaging in community engaged work?
So, very good question. Thank you. I find joy in my work through interacting with people. I found doing my interviews and collecting surveys, I was able to really, have genuine and meaningful conversations with people that I don't really have that often in academia. So to me, that brought joy. And these two communities are very special to me. I grew up in the Hialeah area, and then I went to school in the Holyoke area. So being able to be part of these two communities again for my research during my first year of my master's program was also a way to engage in the community and see what I could use with my resources, skills, and access to also help the community grow and be better. And restoring, that's another, the flip side of that is also food insecurity is the tip of the iceberg for most people. People are struggling with food or tend to be struggling with housing, childcare, addiction, health, and so much more. So some of these conversations can be very difficult to have. So I think it's really important to recognize that and take space away for myself when I have these difficult conversations.
So the challenge, I think something that I really enjoy is that I'll start with the question in terms of restoring myself and some of the challenges. So with urban agriculture, it's kind of this beautiful thing. It's a point of conversation for food insecurity, but then it's also the solution. So I find that I'm always going back and forth between seeing problem areas. So there's theft, inter-community theft happening. There's trash like that's around and that's hard to see sometimes. There's other policing activity that's happening in gardening spaces where and so seeing those different trends occur is really difficult to witness. And so, but at the same token, by volunteering and by being in these spaces, I'm also able to garden. I'm also able to put my hands in the dirt and feel and pull out the weeds and see the growth and see how all of the flowers are blooming and the shifts and eat all of these amazing vegetables. So I think there's kind of this cycle of seeing the challenge areas, but then also seeing the beauty and the potential of urban agriculture and ways that you can produce food to sustain yourself and sustain your community. So that's something that I've thought a lot about.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think the hardest part for me in my recent research in terms of being able to find that joy and even taking that time for myself to restore my energy has been the fact that this research is just so proximate to my life. I'm studying my family, I'm studying my friends, I'm studying my cousins, everybody. I'm thinking very in depth every time I open up my thesis document to be able to write something that is explaining a lot of my lived experiences. And that can be really, really tough to be able to get through the day or the days. But I also think in terms of that restoring yourself, it's realizing that sleep and rest are two different things. Like I love myself some sleep, but I also love rest. And so it's taking time to rest and figuring out what that means and connecting with people beyond the academic spaces and being able to reconnect with nature in ways that I haven't in the past growing up in the built environment. It's about meditation for me. It's about being able to go outside and sit and write in my journal. So those are things that definitely help restore me. And I think finding the joy is being able to sort of, the joy that I find in my work is being able to be in spaces like this where I can have these conversations to sort of elevate the work that I'm doing and elevate the needs of the communities that I'm working with and in, and being able to just learn. I think that's what joy is for me right now.
I would say that I find joy in my community, in Latinas for Climate, in all the girls inside. And seeing also Latinos here at COP being able to speak Spanish in this space, it's like so important to not think a minute in English. It's like, yay, that's a minute of happiness for me in these chaotic spaces. But I will say nobody can understand you like the climate activists that also had to go to college outside of the city. I live by myself in Santiago, in the capital. So nobody can go through the same if you're not the same. Like the eco-anxiety, not even like only the feminist activists can understand you the same way that a climate activist can. So sharing safe spaces with them, it's really, really important to the mental health, I think. And for me to rest is being in my hometown, away from activism, away from college, only with my family, with my dog, I don't know, full of nature and get to unplug like the rain for a minute. It's really, really important, and to know that if you go away for one day, a weekend, nobody will die, like probably. I don't know, in my case at least, nobody will die if I just say that I'm gonna be off this weekend. Please respect my mental health break. And we're all going through the same, so most of the time they do. And yeah, like prioritize yourself and not being able to get into the burnout, which is never nice.
So we have time for one more question.
Tell us about your families and yourself. Do they understand what you do? Do they support what you do? Are they going to be there with you in that sense of 5 years down the road? Do they get it? And the reason I'm asking this is my family did not get what I was doing. If I were a zoologist or the medical doctor, they would understand. But this whole environment thing, they didn't get. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, if panelists can try to keep this to 1 minute. I know this is a good question and a tough one, but
Thanks for the question. And this is something that we've talked so much this COP. I think we as youth, we underestimate the power of our family, like in us, in our minds, in our hearts. And I am so glad that my family supports me 1,000%. I wasn't gonna come to this COP because I wasn't able to get enough funding, but my mom was like you have, I work on my life, like in my small business, and she was like, you save money, like you deserve this. And she like told me to buy the tickets. She's supporting me like all the years, and she drives me to places when I need to. They are the best. I'm so happy that I have the support from my family. I'm the last child. I have 2 older sisters, and they are also the best. Like, I am the first lawyer and law student in my family, so they are really, really happy. They really support, like, not only my nuclear family, but also the extended one. So yeah, my friends at college, at high school, in the activism, and everyone, it's really happy because, as I told you, like, we need this in Chile, in my region. If we don't do something, there's no other way for us. So my dad is always calling me like, this happened, like, now the river that goes to my house, it's dry, and he's like, you have to talk about this. Like, please do something. Like, show us the video that I recorded while I was driving, when I had to stop the car because the rain was so heavy that I wasn't able to see anything. And this is dry season in Chile. So he's like, you have to do something or we won't have a future. So they are supporting me, but because we need it.
Thank you for this question, Dr. Taylor. I would say that my family doesn't necessarily understand like the scale of the work that I'm doing, but they are very curious about it. And so every time I go home, it's new questions about, so what are you learning in school, or what did you write a paper about? Because they want to know more about what the connections are between these structural challenges and what we're experiencing back in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico. But I think also it's not discounting my family's environmental knowledge in general, right? Like growing up where we did, it was like, if on a hot day, like go outside, put a wet rag on your neck, don't turn the AC on. It was like, it's those smaller things that we're hearing about now in terms of like the individual consumption choices of saving the environment, recycling your plastic, and you have different Tupperwares that you're saving for days and decades. And so I think also considering that as some level of knowledge on the environment is really important, because they know their way around being able to stay sustained in a specific climate, given what they've been doing so long. And that is an overlap with economic disparities as well, but I think it is also climate work and environment work.
This is a great question. Thank you so much. So my dad does not get my work, but he also gets my work when it's shown in practice. So he'll say, oh, she's studying agriculture, farmers. But really my work is a true reflection of everything that he has taught me growing up, and the importance of the Black economy and supporting that and uplifting that. And so when I tell him, hey Dad, I just went to Buy Better Foods, a Black-owned grocery store in Bed-Stuy that's 2 blocks from him, he's like, what, that exists? Where have they been? And I'm like, Dad, like, you tell me, like, so Black power, like, support Black businesses, talking about, like, Black Wall Street, and teaching me this on car rides every single day. But even still, there's kind of these gaps in knowledge, and he lives 2 blocks down from a Black-owned and Black-operated grocery store that he hasn't been to. So when I think about putting that connection together, he knows exactly what my work is. And I think in showing that in the reports, and showing that in maps, and showing that in visual ways, when I'm done with my thesis, will be really pivotal. And so when he sees that map, he's gonna see all of the ways, all of the things that he's been teaching me growing up. And I think that's gonna be amazing to see his response and see how he's able to visualize the work that I've done without any words and without any terms and any of the rhetoric.
Yes, thank you for this question as well. Although my family may not understand what it means to write a thesis report. I think we've had many long conversations to kind of go over, well, what exactly am I doing back home, doing surveys and doing these interviews? They're like, huh, you know? But my grandma and my mom and my aunts are the queen of gossip, so they were also perfect people to snowball off because they knew every Latin woman, it seemed, in Miami. So I think they were able to connect me and see that, she's doing all these connections with people, you know, for the better of the good in Miami. So I think they appreciated that about me. And I think they're learning more and more each day, and I hope they're able to see that, even though they may not understand what it means. I'm doing research. They always ask, is this for school? They're still confused what school I go to, but I'll send them my report one day, so thank you.
Thank you all for your responses. Sadly, this is time for our panel. I'd like to give special thanks for Earth Day Network and Dr. Dorcita Taylor for this opportunity, and I hope everyone have a great day. Thank you so much. I hope you took something away from this panel. I'm pretty sure everyone here will love to connect after, so stick around, talk to them, and yeah, I hope everyone had a good time. Thank you.